Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to a 3 News Digital exclusive. I am Ben Axelrod. Joining me today is Nick Camino. A big day here in the college football world, a big couple of weeks here in the college football world, and bringing Nick in to break it all down. Nick, we had to, first, let's go to the weekend. The Mid-American Conference, the MAC, canceling or postponing their fall sports season until the spring. This comes on the heel of all of the Power Five conferences adjusting their schedule in one form or another, most going to conference only, some going to conference only plus one out of conference game. Whatever it is, if we have a college football season, it's going to look a lot different than we've become accustomed to seeing. And then the big news on Sunday that the Power Five commissioners had a meeting, the content of the meeting was essentially the Big Ten saying, hey, we're going to cancel this thing, and we want you guys to come on board and cancel with us. And then there was a report on Monday morning from the Detroit Free Press that the Big Ten had voted to cancel its season. A Big Ten spokesperson has denied that's the case. He says that no vote's been held, that they're still working through their issues. But Nick, this college football thing, when we look back at sports and the coronavirus, it's upsetting right now because it's looking like we're not going to have college football. But on the other hand, I can't say I'm necessarily surprised because this always seemed like the sport that had the biggest uphill battle.
Yeah, I'm with you. Ben, you look at like what the NBA is doing with the bubble. They had the idea. They also have the dollars. You know what I mean? They have the ability, the resources to try to make something like that happen. And a lot of other variables that make it a factor where it's a great thing to have for them, and they've seen great results. College football was always going to be, I think, the most difficult, and you could probably throw college basketball into that too, but I think college football, because of the number of players and the fact that they're on a college campus where early on we've already seen situations where kids were gathering at campus parties and there was a spread of the virus, unfortunately. So, yeah, I do think this was always going to be the toughest battle, and I already think you hit it on the head. No matter what happens, I know a lot of things aren't official yet. There's been different reports that have been floated out there, but no matter what happens with all of this, college football is going to look a lot different. I just heard or saw a report from, I forget where the outlet was. It may have been USA Today, that Scott Frost, the head coach of Nebraska, said, we are prepared to play. We're prepared to do it pretty much by any means necessary. And I know there were some early reports that there were only 2 Big Ten schools that voted to play, and Nebraska was one of them, and Iowa was the other one. And so I think there's been this idea floated out there, well, if Nebraska is going to play, who would they play? Do they go out to Colorado State? Are they playing Colorado? Are they playing North Dakota State? It's almost like rogue college football. How are you going to be able to get this done? So I think you hit it on the head that it's going to look a lot different. But, Ben, we had to know this was coming. It's almost strange to me that we're 3.5 weeks away from Ohio State kicking off the season in Champaign against Illinois, and we're here now just acting like this is a surprise. You had to know this was coming. Shame on people that have been this late to respond to it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think one thing when you look at the coronavirus and in sports, it's really highlighted or exposed strengths and flaws in some of these sports. And you look at the NBA, like you mentioned, the NBA, say what you will about the NBA or issues you might have with the league and how entertaining it is currently. I think one thing that's indisputable is that the commissioner, Adam Silver, has a great relationship with the players. And so that made it really, a pretty easy transition into a bubble, which conversely in baseball, which doesn't have a great relationship between the owners and the players, they don't have a bubble. And now we're in a situation with baseball where every day you're wondering if we're going to get that report that they're going to have to shut things down because of another outbreak like we saw with the Marlins or the Cardinals. I think for college football, amateurism, that's been the biggest thing. And that's, I've seen a lot of people, a big thing yesterday and today has been, we want to play. It's the college players wanting to play. It's the college coaches wanting them to play. I don't think that's ever been in question. I think obviously those guys want to play. The question is, are these universities now willing to take on the liability of having a player get sick or even have something worse than getting sick happen under their watch. And in order to go through in order to present the safest environment possible, whether it's a bubble, whether it's even elements of a bubble, or even some sort of waiver acknowledging the risk, that blows up the NCAA model of that these guys are student athletes. And to me, that's been the biggest thing is, I talked about it highlighting baseball's issues and highlighting some of the NBA strengths. In the NHL, their strengths as well. I think this has really highlighted the issues in the college football model and really the NCAA model at large. And I just don't know how they get past that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know that number one priority should be health and well-being, but unfortunately right behind it, Ben, as well as I do, is money. And I do think from the Mid-American Conference point of view, where they pulled the plug on this early on and we found out Saturday morning, yes, a lot of this is about the well-being of the players and safety of personnel and things like that, be it staff, members, and coaches. But it's obviously the money, too. I think Bowling Green was going to get about $1 million to go play Ohio State the first game of the season. And I think Kent State was going to play Penn State. I mean, there were big paydays that helped support those athletic departments. Forget just the football programs, entire athletic departments, those paydays, and those went away. So I think that ultimately was a doom sentence for the Mid-American Conference, even though they've talked about player safety. To what you mentioned, though, too, you've got some of the biggest names in college football that have come out. Perhaps the top two picks in next year's NFL draft, when you talk about Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, the two tremendous quarterbacks that are going to be for the number one and number two teams in the country. So I think what all of a sudden is happening is you've got a balancing act of, okay, if all these players are coming together saying, we want to play, and they're going to push to play, is this the NCAA's worst nightmare of these players finally being strong enough to unionize? I mean, that, Ben, as well as I do, when it comes to paying college athletes, that's been their biggest fear of the NCAA is players coming together to unionize. And I know the smart guys from Northwestern tried to do it a couple of years ago and it kind of went away. But when you get players like Lawrence and Fields, who no matter whether they play or not are going to be draft picks in the NFL draft saying we want to play, and you've got players that are rallying around them, that's when I think the NCAA is all of a sudden going to have a headache.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think one thing that flew under the radar, and I don't know, yesterday you had a bunch of players tweeting, I want to play. But then at night you had those star players. I mean, you mentioned Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, the offensive tackle from Oregon, who's going to be a top 5 pick, Chuba Hubbard on Oklahoma State. I mean, a lot of the top players in college football, they weren't only tweeting, I want to play, they were tweeting what really amounted to a list of demands. And among those demands was basically, we want to unionize. We want to have a representative voice. And that would blow up the entire college football model. And when you look at, some of this name and image likeness stuff that's coming down the pike here, the college football model and college sports model is probably getting blown up one way or another anyways. But the fact that they didn't have something in place here where they could really acknowledge, hey, these student athletes aren't what we say they are. They actually are held to a higher standard, and we do treat them differently. The fact that they can't even cross that bridge right now, I think that's ultimately what's doomed this college football season, aside from the virus itself. You mentioned the MAC and the money, and it's kind of become a vicious cycle when you look at it. I don't think I think the MAC really, when they canceled on Saturday or postponed on Saturday, I think that was kind of the first domino to fall in all of this. And the reason the MAC had to cancel, like you said, was that the Big Ten and the SEC, when they pulled those games, that ended those seasons. I mean, those $1 million, $1.5 million paydays sustain, in some cases, those team seasons, and in other cases, those teams' athletic departments. So the MAC cancels, and of course, instead of citing money, they cite health. So now you have the MAC, which, while it's not a Power 5 conference, it is a pretty premium conference, a big name conference, a lot of alumni. So when they're canceling and citing health, then people start to look at the Big Ten and say, well, if they're canceling because of health, why are you still playing? And so now it becomes a PR hit for these Power 5 conferences. To me, it's just unique kind of how this has all come kind of full circle for all of these schools.
Yeah, and even though it doesn't sound like anything's 100% set in stone, it does feel like the Big Ten and even the Pac-12 have kind of, said, listen, this is the direction we're going. Probably not going to have college football this fall. You look at other conferences, Ben. You mentioned the SEC. I know the Big 12 has mentioned that they want to try and play. But what type of football season is that if you've got Nebraska going to play the Colorados and you've got the SEC only playing each other? And there was a report out there as soon as Alabama's game against USC ended up getting canceled that they scheduled BYU on their – I mean, what type of season is this? And you can't call this a college football playoff or a college football if Ohio State isn't going to play. And I'm not saying that because we're biased. I'm saying that because according to the coaches poll, they're the number 2 ranked team in the country. I mean, and they're not going to be able to play. I mean, it's backwards. And you mentioned the MAC. I mean, a couple of years ago, Western Michigan was 13-0 and got to play in a power, BCS, not BCS. What am I talking? A New Year's Day 6. Yeah. I mean, so the MAC, and you've mentioned we've seen great players come out of there. Ben Roethlisberger, great. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's a legit conference, and this is a legit problem right now.
Yeah, and that's another thing, just from a logistics standpoint, the fact that college football doesn't have that one centralized commissioner, and that you have, even the NFL has 32 teams. College football has 3-4 times that many teams just at the D1 level. Different schools in different regions, all having different interests. I mean, even from a financial standpoint, like we said, these MAC teams play these games early in September and get pummeled by the Ohio States and the Alabamas of the world because it's worth it from a financial standpoint, whereas a school like Alabama or Ohio State has different interests in playing different sorts of games. It's just such a widespread sport. I don't know how you were ever going to get everybody on the same page just from a logistics standpoint. I think that's part of the issue that we're seeing. I'm going to take a question here from Facebook. This is from Rob Vaughn. Mm-hmm. He says, who do you believe takes the bigger hit with the football season postponements? Smaller conferences like the MAC or powerhouses like the Big Ten when it comes to overall negative ramification on athletic programs? I think it's probably the MAC that takes the bigger hit, just because I think the hit is probably similar, but it's these Big Ten schools that are going to have just the wherewithal to bounce back quicker.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I agree with you. I thought you were going to say it the other way. So I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, listen, the Big Ten schools can survive this. The MAC schools, which were probably breaking even or losing money anyway. I mean, everybody at college sports is making all this money. There's probably 10 athletic departments in the country that are making serious money. I mean, if you look at, Ohio State, Texas, USC, Michigan, Alabama, the list, goes on there a little bit longer. But I mean, a lot of these schools are, there's sports that lose money every year. I mean, wrestling loses money, soccer loses money.
I think most sports outside of football and men's basketball and and then some women's basketball. But other than that, I don't think there's exceptions here and there, but those are the clear exceptions.
Yeah. So I think it definitely hurts the, conferences like the MAC more than it hurts, but it does hurt everybody. And we're really truly going to find out, how equipped, some universities are for stuff like this. It's a tough spot. And I know we're just focusing on college, but Ben, this really makes me think about what's going to happen with the NFL. I do think the benefit the NFL has is those are professionals. They're not going to have to be on a campus. They're trying to go with these localized bubbles. And what did we say, like the NBA? They've got the money. They've got the money to be able to kind of push through this. Money doesn't beat a virus, but at the same time, it can help you make sure your situation is as safe as possible.
Yeah, it's been interesting because since the sports world shut down back in March, and when we still didn't know about basketball and baseball, I was looking toward football season, and the NFL was always the sport I was the most confident in getting back on the field, just because they are such a powerhouse from a money standpoint. I thought they would do everything they can. They would just power through and try to get back on the field. And there's so much money at stake with these TV contracts. Whereas with college football, even though it's really the same sport from a risk standpoint, and there's similar money at stake as far as the TV deals, I had the least amount of confidence in them because of the college model, because of just higher learning in general at this point. Who knows? Who knows how many of these schools are even going to truly have students back on campus in a meaningful way in a couple of weeks here. A lot of that is still getting sorted out. So even though it's football and football, NFL, I have a lot of confidence in. The NFL can at least try. The NFL can go through training camp, go through games, and if they have an outbreak, then they'll have an outbreak and they'll deal with the outbreak, kind of like we've seen with baseball. College just cannot afford to even get to that point. I mean, we've seen these outbreaks for these workouts and things of that nature, and really you look at a program like Rutgers that was going to have trouble anyways this season as far as getting past all that. But if these teams have outbreaks or something worse happens, college is not able to withstand that because these are not professional players. So to me, I just keep coming back to that. And I want college football to be played. Like, I love nothing more than watching college football on Saturdays. I just can't get past how do they make it happen. I haven't seen a good answer.
I'm worried about the future of chalk talk for college football here. I will say this. There's been this ongoing debate, and Ben, you see it on Twitter too, of if these college athletes were to get this, the chances are they are going to recover from it. The issue is, though, if you were to go ahead with your season, you've got head coaches or even assistant coaches that are in their 50s and 60s. We don't even know what their health risks are, their health conditions are if they have pre-existing conditions that would, if they were to get this and they could die. I mean, there's so many things. How about referees? I mean, there's so many different things that go into this. It's not about 20 and 21-year-old great in shape athletes that if they happen to get this, yes, they'll probably be okay. But we don't know the long-term effects down the road, and we don't know if a 50 or 60 or even there's coaches that are in their 70s that are on sidelines. Matt Brown, was he 68, 69 years old? He's the head coach of North Carolina. I mean, if someone like that is to come down with this, we saw what Alvin Gentry said in the NBA. He was risking it. He's been wearing a face mask, the Pelicans head coach. But there's a huge element of risk. No, not for the healthy players. Sure, I think the thought is that they would recover, but there are other risk factors, and I think that's kind of been swept under the rug, unfortunately.
Yeah, and all it takes is one player, or all it takes is one team, or all it takes is one coach, and it's easy to point to numbers and say, the risk numbers show or the death rate or whatever. But I mean, I just remember getting through that first baseball weekend and feeling really good about where baseball was, and then you have literally 2/3 of the Marlins sidelined for a week, and they have to shut down for that week. I don't. In baseball has somehow, I don't know how, but they've somehow managed to get through that and tiptoe around it. If it's a college athletic program, though, it's such a bigger deal.
No, and baseball has a headache now with the Cardinals. I think they've played 5 or 6 games, Ben. They will not, I guarantee it, they will not make that up. They can't make those games up. You can't play 54 games in 45 days. It's just not going to work. Right. So they've talked about, well, we'll go off of winning percentage. But here's the issue. So you've had the Marlins outbreak. You've had the Cardinals outbreak. You've had situations throughout baseball. We saw it in Cleveland where, Zach Plesac goes out to, meet some friends and he gets sent back. The rules are very strict right now. But the sport of baseball, just common sense. Yes, you're maybe touching the same ball. You're near guys on base. It's not really that much of a contact sport. Ben, the thing I keep thinking about is J.J. Watt's uniform when he plays in a game where it's every bit of blood, sweat on him, and you've got guys that are tackling on each other and spit and everything. I mean, that seems to me like an environment that really does not lend itself to staying, safe from the coronavirus.
No, I mean, if ever there was a contact sport, right, it's football. I mean, football and wrestling, like those are the contact sports. And so, I even, people say, well, if the NFL can play, why can't college? I'm not entirely sure how the NFL is going to manage all of this. I mean, I don't, unless they implement some sort of bubble structure or bubble elements, like I really am really wondering how they pull this off, because like you said, all it takes is one player to go out one night, meet some friends, he contracts it, he brings it back. he spreads it to everybody in a game. That sidelines two teams as well as any teams that have to worry about if they just played them or if they will play them. I mean, we saw that in baseball. Like we said, there was that one night where it looked like we were going to have like 5 games canceled because teams were waiting to get results back. Football, I think you could see those numbers extrapolated.
Here's the one thing I think that the NFL has going for it. Not only the money that we already talked about, but the travel is not that much. I mean, you're playing 1 day a week. And if you can do those localized bubbles, that could help you. Listen, there's risk with all of this, but I'm just saying things the NFL has going for it. You're only playing 1 day a week. You're only traveling one time for a week. Some of these places are probably even drivable if you want to do it that way. And I just think that what we've seen with the NBA is there's no travel at all, and they have that bubble. So if the NFL can kind of do a localized bubble, and you're only playing 1 day. I mean, baseball, Ben. These teams are traveling all over the country. I mean, I know they've tried to localize it as much as they can. The Indians are only playing Central Division teams. Maybe it's not as far, but these guys are getting on planes and they're going out, and we don't know where all of them have been going. So that's the thing. Derek Jeter said his guys were going out for milk or something like that. I don't know what year it is that the guys are going out for a milk, but I just it's like you can't control all that. But the one thing I guess the NFL could do, I don't think it's realistic that these teams would get there on a Sunday morning to play a 1 o'clock game, but you could fly in Saturday night and you're only staying 1 day in a hotel and you're out of there right after the game. Maybe that's the thing the NFL could have in its favor, that you're making sure everyone's tested and that travel is very limited, unlike baseball.
Good question here from Rebecca Adams on our Facebook page. With the decisions coming from the Big Ten and the MAC, what does this mean for high school sports? Any idea? That's a great question. Right now, fall sports for the OHSAA are moving forward. But we saw with high school football last week a drastic shift, moving to a 6-game regular season with every team eligible for the playoffs. It seems like I think some teams don't even have to play 6 games if they've decided they're starting later and they can still be eligible for the playoffs. We're going to get more guidance on that this week from Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor John Houston. So I don't want to speculate too much, but to me, I look at, a world in which Ohio State football is not playing. It's hard for me to fathom high school Friday night football taking place too.
Yeah, and here's the thing that we need to keep in mind. That OHSAA thing, that was a recommendation. That was a proposal that they've put out there. So 2 things still need to happen, as Ben pointed out. You need the governor to sign off on it, and you need the Ohio Department of Health to give it their blessing. So I don't know how realistic it is you're going to have high school football. What we found out Friday, that was just a proposal. That was a recommendation from the OHSAA.
That's right, and that's an important distinction. And so right now, the order from the Ohio Department of Health is that any contact sport, including football, has all these protocols. And one of the main protocol is every player, every coach has to get tested before each game. Obviously, that's really difficult from a financial standpoint for these schools to do, from a logistical standpoint. I mean, if that stays into effect, there's going to be schools not playing. Some schools have already chosen not to play. John Houston, Ohio's lieutenant governor, has said that's not the plan that we plan to use for the fall. Now, the flip side of that is we don't know what the plan for the fall is yet. We're supposed to get that this week. And it's, I don't know how we get a plan that doesn't include some semblance of testing. So if they're going to stick with some sort of model that basically holds these high school programs to a pro athletic standard, pro sports standard, I just don't know how viable high school football is going to be for a lot of these programs.
Yeah, I think it was a great question by someone on Facebook. That was a good question. There's just so many variables right now. So the governor's obviously got to give it his go ahead. The one thing we didn't touch on, Ben, I wanted to hit with the and if we have more questions, we'll take them. But so the MAC said they were going to postpone to the spring.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that something that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and these conferences look at, or does that mess with the NFL calendar then with the draft? I don't know how realistic that is.
Well, so the Big Ten commissioner, Kevin Warren, reportedly is in favor of a spring schedule. That's not official. That's not something they've implemented. I mean, they haven't even officially postponed from the fall yet. There's a lot of questions, though, about playing spring football. One of them is, assuming everything gets back on track next year, we have a vaccine, we can have a regular college football season in 2021. What's it look like to have basically 2 college football seasons within 1 calendar year? How do you have these teams playing in March or in April, and then coming back and playing again in August and September and October? That's a big question. And then you mentioned the NFL. Based on the NFL, their CBA, I think they can push the draft, which is in Cleveland, back to June. And that's the furthest they can push it back, I think June 2nd. Now, the flip side of that is the NFL hasn't given any, in fact, the opposite. All reports have been the NFL's not willing to move the draft. So if the NFL's not willing to move the draft, it makes it just less viable for a spring football season. If we see leagues move to the spring, I think the top guys are already out. I don't think you'll see Trevor Lawrence. I don't think you'll see Justin Fields. We've already seen guys like Micah Parsons, Rashad Bateman at Minnesota. We've already seen them say they aren't going to play. But at that point, I think it would be just a free-for-all of NFL prospects dropping out. So
yeah, that would make it tough.
It sounds like a good idea in theory, but I don't know how practical it really is.
Yeah, I also saw it was a Rondale Moore from Purdue dropping out saying that. So I think, you have maybe too much of that. I don't know how it's going to work. You know, I just thought the MAC says, okay, we're going to play in the spring. And then I thought to myself, well, who are you going to play?
Right.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah, and for, a program like the MAC that is less dependent on NFL guys or those guys trying to make the NFL need that extra season, maybe it is more viable to just do a MAC-only schedule in the spring. But again, I don't know how you get around doing that in the spring and then bringing them back for ostensibly a regular season in September. It'd be weird.
In a perfect world, I have this fairy tale dream of the night of the Super Bowl, right after the Super Bowl ends, kick off a college football game right after that, get it going.
I loved the XFL, and it kicked off the weekend after the Super Bowl. And I think a lot of college programs can probably offer a higher level product than what the XFL was giving me on a weekly basis. So I definitely think there is a market for spring football. And, so many really all spring football leagues, the XFL, the Arena League, the USFL, all those leagues have failed in some form or another. And the big mistake, the AAF, the big mistake a lot of them have made is trying to be the NFL's minor league system.
Yeah.
College football is the NFL's minor league system. So to go from the NFL to what's really a true minor league system like college football, I think it would be a ratings hit. It's just a matter of how viable it would actually be. Yeah,
and we saw the XFL for a couple of weeks was strong, and then it kind of faded a little bit, and didn't help that everything started with the, it just kind of wore out. But yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you that there's room there, there's interest there. America loves football, so there's definitely some interest there if they could pull it off.
There's no question about that. All right, last thing, and then we'll get out of here. How do you see these last few weeks, this next week, I should say, playing out? Because it seems inevitable that the Big Ten is going to cancel. It looks like the Pac-12 is not far behind. It is interesting. Some of the political pressure is starting to get involved. And as we've seen with the coronavirus, that can kind of shift things here at a moment's notice. But I think the Big Ten and Pac-12 cancel here in the next couple of days. And then I think all attention shifts to the ACC, SEC, and Big 12 to see if they'll follow suit.
Yeah, I would think if it happens where a couple Power Fives drop out, I mean, that's when you're going to see the landscape of this completely change. And there's really going to be pressure, I think, on the SEC then and the Big 12 saying, hey, do you really want to play? Are you sure you want to do this? It's not going to look good if they play and there's no problems and, there's a champion. It's not going to feel the same because you're going to have like Ohio State and all these other great teams that are not playing. So it's going to feel different. So, okay, congratulations if you get through it, whatever. I don't know if anyone's going to look at that season that way. But if you don't, the alternative is that you could have an outbreak. This could be bad. It could be bad for the college, the university. I mean, you could have, an outbreak. So I think the negatives completely outweigh the positives if you're the SEC and the Big 12 saying, hey, we're going to try to play. Like, okay, if you play and you get through this, like, what's your end goal? That you won a championship that not everybody plays? It's just, I don't know. I feel I always try to weigh the pros and the cons. I feel like the cons just completely outweigh the pros here. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, and you and I are probably guilty of this too. So many people look at this through a sports lens. These are universities that care deeply about their reputations. So the SEC, if they see, the other 4 Power 5 conferences drop out, they're going to be worried about looking like, hey, we're the conference that only cares about football and don't care if we put our students or our student athletes at risk. So I just think at that point, we saw it with the schedules that the SEC reportedly didn't like going to the conference only schedule. But once one school does it or one conference does it, it's just kind of a domino effect.
Yeah, I think if a couple of these Power 5s drop off, even one, it's going to put pressure on. So we'll see. We'll see. And the players, that's going to be interesting what we hit on with those players. If I don't know if there's a way to unionize or what, but we're going to see how much power they have. I don't think it's very much, but we're going to see what some of those big name stars like Lawrence and Fields may mean. We'll see.
Yeah, we definitely will. And we will have you covered on all the latest in the college football world, all the latest in the sports world amid this strange time in sports. But we will have you covered on all the latest on WKYC and WKYC.com. Thank you for joining us today. For Nick Camino, I am Ben Axelrod. Thanks for watching this 3 News Digital exclusive.